Now let's dive into emotional stories and share your thoughts in the comments below. The first time I saw Mia, it was like witnessing a sunrise. She had this incandescent glow and effortless magnetism that drew every eye in the room. It's funny how the relentless march of time can dim even the brightest flame. Those early years with her were a whirlwind of joy, stolen kisses, and endless conversations that stretched into the dawn. Her laughter was infectious, her spirit buoyant, a constant reminder of life's beauty. Even in the face of adversity back then, I was just a young carpenter with callous hands and a head full of dreams, and she loved me for it. Or so I believed. A decade flew by and life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Maybe a little too comfortable. I became a creature of habit, leaving for the construction site before the sun rose and returning home long after it had set. The work was decent, but it wasn't my own. Each late night, each new blister on my hands was a silent vow to myself. One day, I would have my own workshop, a place where I could be master of my own time, hone my craft, and maybe, just maybe, forge my own destiny. But dreams, especially the ambitious ones, demand a price. And sometimes that price is the warmth of shared mornings, the casual intimacy of brushing hands in the hallway. Mia's smile, once a beacon, became a rare and fleeting thing. I can't pinpoint the exact moment it began to fade, only that one day I realized it was gone. She was still beautiful, still radiant in her own way, but it was like watching the embers of a dying fire, and I, consumed by work and weary from the daily grind, was too blind, too exhausted to ask why, to even try to understand. It was easier to tell myself that we were just busy, that this was the natural course of things when two people build a life together but find themselves on diverging paths. My stubborn pride blinded me to the growing chasm between us, a distance that crept in silently until it felt like we were separated by an ocean. I'd come home to find her on the couch, eyes glazed over, lost in some mindless TV show, or scrolling endlessly through her phone with a distant look, like she was miles away. I'd grunt a greeting, mumble something about dinner, and retreat to change out of my dusty work clothes. We still talked, of course, but it was all surface-level stuff: groceries, bills, and the neighbors' incessantly barking dog. Gone were the deep, intimate conversations about our hopes, our dreams, our future together. The silence between us became a constant companion, something I learned to tune out, like the throbbing ache in my hands after a long day of hammering and lifting. Our time together felt hollow, a charade we both performed out of habit. Date nights became a distant memory, replaced by her offhand mentions of going out with friends or needing some space. Initially, I convinced myself it was good for her, a chance to relax and recharge while I toiled away building my brick by brick. But deep down, I knew that when your partner starts seeking fulfillment outside the world you've built together, it's not just about needing a breather, it's about something fundamental slipping away. Yet I clung to the hope that it was just a phase, that she would come back, that things would eventually settle. That one day I'd walk in, toss my keys on the table, and find her smiling at me like she used to. But life, as I'd learned the hard way, rarely follows such a predictable script. It started with subtle changes, things I barely registered at first. Mia's schedule became increasingly packed with evening classes, meetups with friends, and Mia began talking about a new fitness regime. She was eager to try Pilates, she called it, along with some high-intensity workouts to shake things up. I nodded, offering a weary smile as I brushed sawdust from my hands after another double shift. That's good, I mumbled the words, feeling as mechanical as the tools I'd been wielding all day. Deep down, I thought she deserved it, a chance to find some spark outside our increasingly monotonous life. But as time went on, her outings became more frequent, and the hours she spent away stretched far beyond what any workout or casual drinks with friends could justify. I arrive home to an empty house more often than not, the silence, a heavy presence that settled over me like a shroud. Dinners once shared at the table were replaced by solitary meals at the kitchen counter, or cold leftovers consumed in front of the flickering TV. The couch still held the faint impression of her body, a ghostly reminder of her absence that lingered as I watched the clock, straining to hear the familiar sound of her key in the door. How was your night? I'd ask whenever she finally returned. Her smile was always fleeting, her replies brief, And vague good, she'd say, already halfway to the bedroom, brushing off my attempts at conversation like they were an inconvenience. Weekends, once our sanctuary from the demands of work and daily life, had become fragmented. We used to escape the city, taking long drives to discover hidden roadside cafes for cheap coffee and pie. We spending lazy afternoons with her, curled up with a book on the porch while I tinkered with an old piece of furniture or sharpened my tools. But now those cherished moments were constantly interrupted by her new impulsive plans. Meeting the girls, she'd call over her shoulder, snatching her purse and leaving me standing alone as the door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing louder with each departure. At first I rationalized it as a phase, telling myself everyone needs space. Sometimes I blamed work, the relentless hours that drained me, leaving me with nothing but a tired nod and a mumbled greeting when I finally dragged myself home. But then I started noticing the extra care she took with her appearance, the meticulous selection of her clothes, the spark in her eyes that hadn't been there in months. A cold dread began to weigh on my chest, heavy and undeniable. She looked happy, vibrant, energized in a way I hadn't seen in ages, and I couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that it wasn't just the new fitness routine, that someone else was responsible for this newfound glow. It's amazing how quickly a routine can become a facade, concealing something deeper. She'd give me a quick peck on the cheek, a perfunctory gesture devoid of warmth or affection, and I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling while she laid beside me, scrolling through her phone in the dark, the faint light casting shadows across her face. I'd catch snippets of her conversations, her laughter, her hushed whispers, and try to convince myself it was all innocent. But doubt, once planted, takes root and grows no matter how hard you try to weed it out. The distance between us was no longer confined to our conversations. It permeated our home, our very existence. Our lives had become a series of polite exchanges, stripped of the intimacy and playfulness that once defined them. We still shared a house, a bed, but not a life. I didn't voice the questions that gnawed at me, didn't demand answers, perhaps out of fear of what I might discover, the fear that the woman who once made me feel capable of conquering the world now found her happiness elsewhere. Or maybe what, deep down I already knew the truth but wasn't ready to confront it. The first time I noticed the discrepancies, it was almost accidental. Mia had been raving for weeks about a new trendy restaurant downtown, where she planned to have dinner with friends that evening. As I sat on the couch idly scrolling through social media, a tagged photo from one of her friends caught my eye. The caption read, "Girls' night out, laughs and cocktails at the rooftop lounge," but the background wasn't the chic restaurant she described. Instead, it was a dimly lit bar, the same one we used to frequent in our younger days. I froze, my fingers tightening around my phone. The smiling faces of Mia and her friends seemed to mock me, and a wave of unease washed over me. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just a mix-up, that maybe they'd changed plans at the last minute and she simply forgot to tell me. But the seed of doubt had been planted. In the following days, more inconsistencies surfaced. Mia would mention a late workout, but the details wouldn't quite align. A story that didn't match the timeline she'd given, a social media post that appeared too early, or a small detail that seemed off in her recounting of the evening. I started connecting these discrepancies, even though a part of me desperately wanted to ignore them. After all, Mia had given me no concrete reason to distrust her. It had to be my imagination, the strain of long days spent hammering and lifting, the physical exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. The logical part of me insisted I was being foolish. I'd come home with aching muscles and a mind numbed by the daily grind, repeating to myself that I was overthinking things. "You're just tired then," I'd mutter, scrubbing the dust and grime off my hands at the kitchen sink, as if trying to wash away more than just sawdust. It felt safer to attribute my anxieties to fatigue and stress, because confronting Mia with my suspicions would make them real, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that. But the tension became increasingly difficult to ignore. Every time I saw her phone lying on the coffee table or heard it buzz late at night, my chest would tighten and my gaze would linger a moment too long. Watching as she picked it up, her face turned away, the guarded expression in her eyes as she looked at the screen. Her laughter, once so spontaneous, now seemed forced. Her eyes no longer meeting mine when she spoke, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that the long hours were making me delusional, but the more I attempted to dismiss my doubts, the more questions arose. Late one night, unable to sleep, I lay in the darkness, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing beside me. It should have been comforting, the familiar presence after all these years. But instead it felt empty, like a hollow echo of what we once shared, and I thought about the nights she claimed to be out with friends, about the photos, the locations that didn't add up. Clenching my jaw, I forced myself to believe that my suspicions were merely a byproduct of exhaustion, that somehow everything would make sense if only I could silence the doubts. The doubt is a relentless whisper. It doesn't vanish just because you wish it away. The worst part was the guilt, the gnawing feeling that I was betraying Mia simply by questioning her loyalty, that I was becoming the kind of man who saw shadows where there were none. It felt like I was morphing into someone I'd always dreaded becoming: bitter, suspicious, unable to trust the woman I once knew better than myself. Yet as much as I tried to quell the turmoil in my mind, it only intensified, demanding answers. I was too afraid to seek. The evening began like any other. I arrived home to a dimly lit, empty house. The faint glow from the hallway lamp barely penetrated the living room, casting long, eerie shadows across the furniture. I sank into the worn armchair with a sigh, the exhaustion from another grueling day at the workshop weighing heavily on me. Not long after, the sound of the front door opening shattered the silence, and Mia stumbled in. Her movements were unsteady, and I watched with a mixture of concern and annoyance as she kicked off her heels, a tipsy smile playing on her lips as she mumbled something incoherent. Then she disappeared down the hallway towards the bathroom, and the sound of the shower running soon filled the silence, masking her soft humming and the gentle splashes of water. Her phone lay abandoned on the kitchen counter, buzzing once, then again. The screen lit up with a notification. I wasn't the type to snoop through her messages, even with the doubts gnawing at me. I had always respected her privacy, but something about that moment, the insistent buzzing in the quiet room, the stark contrast between her carefree stumble and the questions that had haunted me for weeks, drew me from the chair. I reached for her phone, my hand moving slowly, hesitantly. The message was from Mia's number, but it wasn't meant for me. Honey, I forgot to send you our video. I want more of this with you because there's so little time we have. The words struck me like a physical blow, my eyes tracing them over and over, struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. My heart pounded in my ears as I clicked to open the attachment. What played on the screen made my blood run cold. It was me with another man. The raw evidence of her betrayal was undeniable, their intimacy unmistakable. In that moment, the weight of it all crashed down on me. I stood there, paralyzed, a wave of shock washing over me. The kitchen, the photos on the fridge, the creak of the floor beneath my feet. Everything around me felt surreal, real, as if I were viewing my life through a fractured lens. My body moved on its own, setting the phone back down on the counter with a trembling hand. I wanted to scream, to smash something, anything, but the air felt trapped in my lungs, heavy and suffocating. Anger followed swiftly, burning through the numbness. My jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might shatter. My fists curled until my nails dug painfully into my palms. I forced myself to look away from her phone, my eyes darting around the kitchen, as if searching for an anchor, something to hold on to before the storm inside me ripped everything apart. My mind raced with questions that only fueled the fury. How long? Who was he? How could she do this? The trust we had built, the years we had shared, shattered in an instant, leaving only jagged edges of betrayal. The of her laughter from earlier that night played in my mind, distorted, twisted, cruel. The sound of water running in the bathroom felt distant, as if it belonged to another world, another life. I paced the narrow space between the counter and the sink, breathing hard, trying to steady myself enough to think clearly. Each second was a struggle to keep from storming into the bathroom and confronting her, to keep from succumbing to the rage that threatened to consume me. I felt like a stranger in my own home, surrounded by the familiar objects of a life that now felt like a lie. And there, in the quiet hum of the house that had held both our secrets and dreams, I stood, realizing that everything had changed irrevocably. As I stared at the darkened screen of Mia's phone, the storm in my chest began to subside, giving way to something colder, more calculated. The initial shock and burning rage had faded, replaced by a numb clarity that sharpened my focus in a way I hadn't felt before. I knew that barging into the bathroom and demanding answers, while emotions were running high, would only escalate an already volatile situation. If I was going to confront this, I needed to do it strategically, with a clear head and a plan. I carefully placed the phone back on the counter, ensuring I left no trace of having touched it. The faint sound of running water in the background gave me a moment to breathe, to organize the whirlwind of thoughts in my mind into something actionable. I sat at the kitchen table, my fingers drumming lightly against the wood. Scenarios played out in my head one after another as I considered my next move. Mia would finish her shower soon, and when she did, I needed to act as if nothing had changed, no matter how twisted I felt. Inside, my gaze drifted to the framed photos on the wall, a picture of us smiling on a beach trip from years ago. The way her eyes crinkled with laughter, it felt absurd now how those memories seemed like relics from another life. But those memories served a purpose, grounding me, and as I formulated a plan, I couldn't let emotions dictate my actions. I had to stay one step ahead. The first step was observation. If I lost my temper now, I would lose the element of surprise, and surprise was crucial. I needed to know who this man was, how deep this betrayal ran, and whether there had been other lies. The questions multiplied in my mind as I dissected the reality. I thought I knew my instincts, honed over years of diagnosing problems piece by piece in the workshop, kicked in. This situation was no different. It required precision and patience. Every detail mattered. The plan solidified in my mind. As I weighed my options, I played the long game, maintaining the facade of the unsuspecting husband. While I gathered the information I needed over the next few days, I'd watch her closely, noting the calls she took, the subtle shifts in her behavior, any detail that might fill in the gaps. My phone would become a tool for record-keeping, collecting the breadcrumbs she unknowingly left behind. If she noticed my silence or distance, I'd blame it on work. The endless hours at the garage would be a convenient excuse for distraction. I considered accessing her phone again, but that was too risky. One misstep, and the whole charade would crumble. No, I had to be smarter. There were other ways to gather her data without arousing suspicion, and I would utilize every resource available to ensure she remained in the dark. The man in the video, he was the missing piece. His identity could be the leverage I needed, whether for answers, confrontation, or something more. When the water shut off, I straightened up, forcing my features into a neutral mask. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat, suppressing the urge to confront her right then and there. This was a game of endurance. Now I heard the soft padding of her feet, and a moment later she appeared in the hallway, wrapped in a towel, her damp hair clinging to her shoulders. I met her eyes and offered a weary smile. Long day, she asked, her voice light and casual, completely unaware of the turmoil she had unleashed. Yeah, I replied, my tone steady. Practiced the same as always. Inside, anger simmered, but I was already channeling it, transforming it into fuel for what lay ahead. I watched as she padded into the bedroom, leaving a faint trace of her shampoo lingering in the air. The night passed in an uneasy silence, the space between us growing colder with each passing hour, but I didn't care for now. The mask would remain firmly in place, and the plan would unfold one calculated step at a time. The next morning, I woke up with a clear objective. The plan had taken shape in the quiet hours of the night, each detail meticulously crafted. While I lay beside Mia, staring into the darkness, she stirred in her sleep, oblivious to the transformation that had taken place within me. I was a new version of myself, one who could smile, joke, and even feign concern, all while concealing the turmoil turning within. I rose early as usual, brewing coffee, going through my routine, letting each step reinforce the mask I wore. When Maya finally joined me, her hair still damp from the shower, I waited for the opportune moment. It came when I reached for the sugar jar, my elbow nudging her phone just enough to send it tumbling off the counter, hitting the tiled floor with a sharp crack. The sound pierced the morning quiet, making her jump and curse under her breath. "Oh, Alex, be careful," she exclaimed, half exasperated as she retrieved it, wincing at the shattered screen. I put on my most Sheepish expression, raising my hands in mock surrender. "I'm sorry, hun, let me make it up to you," I said, masking my intentions behind an apologetic smile. "I'll get you a new one today, whatever you want, it's on me." She looked surprised by my insistence, but not suspicious. The Alex she knew was practical to a fault, not one to fuss over electronics or offer to buy a new gadget without good reason. "Really?" she said, a hint of excitement breaking through. I nodded, playing the role of the forgetful, clumsy husband, eager to make amends. The rest of the morning passed quickly. I watched her carefully, noting how she chose her clothes, her mood noticeably brighter at the prospect of shopping. It was almost insulting how easily she could slip back into normally as she browsed the store's displays later that day, chatting with a sales associate about models and features. I felt the tension building in my chest. This was my opportunity, and I had to act swiftly. With her old phone tucked into my pocket, cracked but still functional, I slipped outside where the signal was strong. The app I'd installed on my own phone the night before launched seamlessly, pulling data from her device, photos, messages, contacts, all of it began transferring. A silent betrayal hidden in plain sight. I glanced back through the store's glass wall, watching her smile as she tested a new phone, completely oblivious. The minutes dragged on, each one filled with the low hum of adrenaline as I watched the progress bar inch across the screen. When it was finally complete, I slipped her damaged phone back into my pocket and returned to the store, timing my entrance perfectly as she glanced up and waved me over to inspect her selection. I nodded approvingly, injecting a touch of humor to dissipate any lingering tension. "Looks like I won't be dropping this one, I right?" She laughed, swatting me playfully, and just like that, the moment passed. We left with her new phone in hand. She chattered about its features and color as I drove home, her words wasting over me like meaningless noise. I forced myself to react, to play the part, all while the true weight of what I now possessed pressed heavily on my mind. Nightfall enveloped me, the silence broken only by the soft rhythm of Mia's breathing from the bedroom. I sat alone at the kitchen table, the dim light from a street lamp casting an eerie glow through the blinds. In my hand was Mia's old phone, the screen cracked from the accidental fall. I had orchestrated its fractured seam to mirror the state of my own mind. Splintered yet focused, I had already extracted what I needed from it, but tonight it would serve one last purpose. I found his contact, the one I had seen in countless exchanges, each message a fresh wound I had forced myself to endure. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I typed, "If you want to see more of my videos made for you, pay up. Consider it an investment in our fun." I hit send without hesitation, the weight of my intent settling in the silence. Stretched agonizingly as I imagined his reaction. Would he laugh, confused by the sudden demand, or would he hesitate, sensing the change in tone? The phone vibrated, and his response came through. "Hi, you're really something tonight. What's gotten into you?" His words were laced with the arrogance of a man who thought he had everything under control. My teeth clenched, muscles tensing as I read his playful reply. He had no idea, couldn't fathom that he was now a pawn in a much larger game. I exhaled slowly and began typing the next message, ensuring every word struck like a hammer blow. "You don't understand, do you? I have all your videos and photos, and trust me, what you're hiding isn't impressive. If you want to keep this quiet, you'll pay a certain amount or your world collapses." The silence that followed was deafening, the tension building with every passing second. This time the pause in his reply was longer. I could almost feel his pulse quicken as he read and reread the message, the realization that this wasn't a flirtation, but a threat sinking in. The phone buzzed again, this time with less confidence. "Who is this? What kind of game is this?" I leaned forward, fingers pressing the keys harder than necessary. "It's not a game. You'll transfer the money or you'll face the consequences. Everyone you know will see what you've been up to." The words were simple, cold, and direct. Moments later, as a notification popped up, the transfer. It was a small amount, almost laughable in its insignificance, a gesture of tentative compliance. He was testing the waters.